Hey, just a quick note before the episode starts. You're probably wondering what I've been up to since the last time you saw me. Well, I've been busy. I've been putting up my book podcast on patreon.com/infamousphere, where I review LGBT books and historical literature. I've also been setting up my Redbubble store, where I've been putting up my art, the kind of things that you would have seen in my title cards, and that's at redbubble.com/people/infamousphere. But finally, the big announcement. I've written a book. It's a queer historical Mountie romance called 40 Mile Claim, a queer tale of the Great White North. Do you like historical details about daily life in 1900s Canada? Do you like bisexual male characters who aren't evil, seductive sex vampires? Do you like gay sex? Well, good news, because my book has all of those things. You can preview and purchase it on Amazon here, and also in the link below in the description. Help me get more book sales than Milo Yiannopoulos. Alright, on with the show. Hello, I'm Infamousphere, and this is Period Drama. Proto-nostalgia. It's a recently coined phrase that refers to a nostalgia for a time period you haven't personally experienced. And like other forms of nostalgia, it's a deeply flawed understanding of the past. It's fine to be fascinated with the aesthetics of a particular historical period. After all, if I wasn't interested in the unique context afforded by the past, I wouldn't be anywhere near interested in historical fiction as I am now. But it's another thing entirely to romanticise the past, to believe that its surface qualities of gallantry and loveliness and really good clothing mean that the past was somehow genuinely superior.
With that said, there's something incredibly splendid about the era of the Grand Hotel. Like department stores, which were self-contained palaces of commerce, filled with neat doodads like cash railways and pneumatic tubes, the idea of a Grand Hotel is something magical, signifying a completely different understanding of travel to how we view it today. These places weren't a means to an end, a place to park your suitcase and leave to go sightseeing. Grand hotels were destinations in themselves. You wouldn't visit a city, you would visit a hotel. In an era where travel was significantly more time-consuming and burdensome than it is now, a beautiful, sumptuous hotel where you could spend weeks, if not months, relaxing and having your needs catered to was considered a necessity. They were rehabilitative, places for the wealthy to rest. The most photographed hotel in the world is a Grand Hotel, built to entice passengers to travel on the Canadian Pacific Railway. The whole of Death in Venice takes place in a Grand Hotel. Roald Dahl's The Witches? Grand Hotel. The Titanic? A floating Grand Hotel. The opulence of this bygone era fascinates us.
And yet there's something very creepy about a Grand Hotel.
Their association with rest also conjures up the corresponding image of chronic sickness, of the sanitarium. They might remind us of former grandeur, but they are also obsolete, abandoned, possibly haunted. Consider the ghastly Hotel Splendide, a bizarre and macabre retreat in a nasty place, powered and heated by the residents' own shit. Or the ridiculousness of the Battle Creek Sanitarium, the abandoned starship Titanic, devoid of people and hurtling through space. The Great Northern and its corresponding evil counterpoint, the Black Lodge, or the eeriness of the Overlook.
In this era of Airbnb and cheap chain hotels, the Grand Hotel becomes even more compelling. But how do you depict one? As a straightforward place for refuge? The mere setting of a story? As a fantastical ideal of the past? Or do you explore how incredibly alien it must seem to modern viewers, who have probably never had the chance to stay in one? But forget that, because there's another option. Create your own beautiful vision of the past, a love letter to previous hotel fictions, one that both addresses history and ignores it entirely. Well, Grand Budapest Hotel. Ah yes, the Grand Budapest Hotel. This 2014 film was directed by one Wes Anderson, a director known for his very distinctive visual style. This review is a Patreon request by Laura. As a reward for her generous support, Laura was able to select something for me to review. If you would like to support the show, you can do so at patreon.com/infamousphere. And now on with the plot.
It's the 1980s. A writer reminisces about the 1960s when he visited a hotel in the imagined country of Zabroka, the Grand Budapest. There he runs into the owner of the hotel, Zero Mustafa. Over dinner, Zero tells him about how he came to acquire the hotel. In the 1930s, he was a refugee from a war-torn country working as a lobby boy under the supervision of Monsieur Gustave, the concierge. Monsieur Gustave was seeing an elderly woman who died, leaving him a painting in her will. However, it turns out the elderly woman was murdered, and Monsieur Gustave was framed for the crime, leaving him to be arrested and go on the lam, aided by the young Zero along the way. And shit goes down, only to be resolved right at the end by the discovery of a second will, leaving Gustave everything. The villain, the elderly lady's evil son, then evaporates and is never seen again. Gustave, in turn, leaves Zero the hotel in his will, and that's how a random dude ended up owning a hotel. Hooray!
It was an enchanting old ruin. But I never managed to see it again.
Now, the plot itself is one of the movie's weakest aspects. So what is the appeal of this movie exactly? Maybe it's the characters.
Like many Wes Anderson films, the Grand Budapest Hotel has an ensemble cast. Dozens, if not hundreds of people march in and out of this film, a parade of recognisable faces wearing fabulous costumes and making witty remarks. However, the film hinges on three characters: Zero, Agatha, Zero's love interest, and finally the all-powerful Monsieur Gustave. Monsieur Gustave is the very centre of the hotel and the heart of the film itself. It's his relationship with Madame D and resulting inheritance from her that begins the mad caper that is also this movie's plot. He's knowledgeable, poetic, foul-mouthed, self-assured and distinctive.
You see, there are still faint glimmers of civilization left in this barbaric slaughterhouse that was once known as humanity. Indeed, that's what we provide in our own modest, humble, insignificant... Oh, fuck it.
But he's also a complete wanker and shows callous disregard for others.
Monsieur Gustave also delivered a nightly sermon.
I'm reminded of a verse. The painter's brush touched the inchoate face by ends of nimble bristles.
I'm not sure how much we're supposed to like him.
What on God's earth possessed you to leave the homeland where you very obviously belong and travel unspeakable distances to become a penniless immigrant in a refined, highly cultivated society that, quite frankly, could have gotten along very well without you?
I've always found Ralph Fiennes unsettling. There's something affected and weirdly controlled about him.
Truly and honestly, oh dear God, what have you done to your fingernails?
I beg your pardon?
This diabolical varnish, the colour is completely wrong.
Oh really, don't you like it?
It's not that I don't like it, I am physically repulsed.
He's the sort of man you cast as a villain, and I'm perplexed by the fact that he's been so commonly cast as someone who's meant to be charming or sophisticated. Much like other Ralph Fiennes characters, there's something very creepy about Monsieur Gustave. Maybe it's his weird, sexualised language when talking about women.
She was dynamite in the sack, by the way.
She was 84, Monsieur Gustave.
I've had older. When you're young, it's all fillet steak, but as the years go by, you have to move on to the cheaper cuts.
Or the fact that he takes Zero under his wing for seemingly no reason at all, in a manner that reminds me uncomfortably of grooming.
Is he supposed to be queer? If not, why is he coded as such?
That's a migratory visa with stage 3 worker status, France, darling. He's with me.
What happened?
What happened, my dear Zero, is I beat the living shit out of a snivelling little runt called Pinky Bandinsky, who had the gall to question my virility. He's actually become a dear friend.
Zero, on the other hand, is pretty nothing. He's a reactive character who mostly tags along and acts as a sounding board for Monsieur Gustave's ideas. He does have some involvement in the plot and is allegedly the movie's protagonist, but he's completely flat. It's hard to critique the skill of the actor when Anderson seems to favour an incredibly emotionless performance.
Why do you want to be a lobby boy?
Well, who wouldn't? At the Grand Budapest, sir. It's an institution.
Sometimes this comes across as comedic, but it's a device he's definitely overused, often requiring even skilled actors to be as flat and cardboardy in their delivery as 1983 Jane Eyre.
I see. Straight away. Get me Monsieur Robin at L'Hotel Côte du Cap, please.
How come people criticise Keanu for being flat, when all of the characters in Wes Anderson's films apparently get a free pass?
The most likeable character in the film is definitely Agatha, the baker's apprentice, and the other half of the young love story that Anderson seems so fixated on telling again and again. As Agatha, Saoirse Ronan is industrious, worried when she needs to be worried, brave when she needs to be brave, and the only female character who isn't blindly seduced by Monsieur Gustave's crap.
I'm only interviewing this vision of loveliness on your behalf. Never be jealous in this life, Zero, not even for an instant.
Is he flirting with you?
Yes.
You're a pastry chef, one of the
I'm
best
not
in
a
the
fence,
region.
if that's the term. I don't trade in stolen property.
Hide this.
No.
Okay, but take it anyway.
She plays a crucial part in the plot of the film, but in the epilogue we find out she was unceremoniously fridged.
She and our infant son would be killed 2 years later by the Prussian grippe, an absurd little disease. Today we treat it in a single week, but in those days, many millions died.
There's something cold and unappealing about Anderson's characters, even the ones who are supposed to be charming. Monsieur Gustave makes my skin crawl, Zero may well be a cardboard cutout of himself, and Agatha serves the male characters, rather than being able to achieve ambitions of her own, despite the implication that Zero supports her desire to be a baker and appreciates her skill.
Not only was Agatha immensely skilled with a palette knife and a buttercream flourish,
Mendel.
she was also very brave.
As for the ensemble cast, many of the actors do an excellent job and are faultless, but are there so briefly that they end up making not much of an impression at all.
It's easy to be perfect when you don't have to do anything other than turn up.
But where the characters fall flat, and the plot is an excuse, the rest of the movie exceeds itself. This is an absolutely beautiful movie, in every technical sense. The cinematography is masterful. The editing is very clever, and several sequences are incredibly well constructed. The production design is gorgeous, with each time period having a very different colour scheme incorporated into the furnishings and costuming with utmost care. There aren't many people who can make an all-pink colour scheme seem anything other than cartoonish and garish, but Anderson manages it. There are several great touches, such as the way the film shows post-mortem photographs on screen as slides, or the nod to Egon Schiele's grotesque eroticised paintings. It's a cliché to say that a film is a love letter to cinema, but Anderson directs Grand Budapest in a way that acknowledges the history of the cinematic medium. Each section is in a different aspect ratio, corresponding to the cinematic style of the time period the section depicts. He uses models and matte paintings in a way that acknowledges their artifice. The tradition of creating films about film that accept and play with the limitations of the medium is a tradition as old as cinema itself. Several silent films are very self-aware. Lubitsch's The Doll features the director setting up a series of miniatures, which then turn into their live-action equivalents.
Anderson's decision to do the same thing is more than self-aware. It's cute.
Anderson doesn't have to use matte paintings and models, not nowadays, when even relatively small-scale productions use digital compositing, and he doesn't have to make the mattes and models look as artificial as they do, when directors like Ridley Scott and Steven Spielberg were filming models and mattes much more realistically back in the 1980s.
But this is what Anderson is like. Very self-conscious, very twee, and very aware of just how constructed his films are. And in a world where people fetishise realism without acknowledging just how artificial realism often is, I can't fault him for that.
It also makes it harder to criticise the mistakes Anderson makes, like saying the widow Madame D died of strychnine poisoning when her corresponding post-mortem photograph shows none of the distinctive rictus one would expect from strychnine, as one is sure that these aren't mistakes, so much as they are deliberate distortions, or Anderson's attention being directed elsewhere, to things he probably believes are more important to the narrative and craft of the film than toxicological accuracy. There's a reason why this film won Academy Awards for costuming, production design, makeup and original score, and that's because it does all of these things immaculately and splendidly, while also making us feel something deeper than a superficial appreciation for the beautiful. We're caught up in the romance and the drama of the Grand Hotel, and we feel a yearning for it that we can't explain. And no wonder, for Wes Anderson has managed something unusual, to create a feeling of nostalgia for a time and place most of us have never experienced.
Is it simply your last connection to that vanished world? His world, if you will.
However, aesthetic isn't everything. It can't be everything. This is a narrative rather than an art piece, and as such, it's strange and uncomfortable, with a weird, violent edge.
Where is the Grand Budapest? And more importantly, when? This was a turbulent time in history, and one understands Wes Anderson's decision to set it in an alternate version of the 30s, when he can have the threat of war and political upheaval, but without evoking or toying with real-world events. But there are unsettling parallels with real-world events. Zero is a refugee whose family was slaughtered, travel movements are impeded, and Monsieur Gustave is killed by not Nazis.
What happened in the end?
In the end, they shot him. So it all went to me.
More than prettiness alone, this is what works about the film. Its duality. Its ability to embody the most beautiful and wondrous things about the Grand Hotel, while also reminding us of the most weird and ghastly things that could ever happen in a retreat high in the mountains.
It should make us unsettled. It should remind us that there were things in the past that weren't good, even if they appeared to be wonderful. That beautiful buildings could be hiding places for horrible things.
Yet again, it's artificial. A throwback, a European film produced by Westerners, in English. It's the Grand Budapest, but Hungary isn't even mentioned. Kovacs is a Hungarian name, but they pronounce it in an anglicised way.
Deputy Kovacs.
Wes Anderson affects accuracy, but it's an invented kind, a mishmash of European cultures as vibrant and distinctive as it is completely divorced from reality. It's a different kind of accuracy, a Hollywood kind. Wes Anderson wrote the story himself, inspired by the writings of a real Austrian Jewish author, Stefan Zweig, a man who apparently was one of the most popular authors in the world in the 1920s and 30s, but doesn't seem to make the literary canon nowadays. Zweig was forced to flee Austria in World War II, and ended up committing suicide over his despair at the state of Europe, and yet, like Anderson, he was criticised as being superficial. Even the author's suicide note left German author Michael Hoffmann gripped by the irritable rise of boredom halfway through it, and the sense that he doesn't mean it, that his heart isn't in it, not even in his suicide.
Wow, that's a pretty fucking smouldering take right there, Hoffmann. Oh, and speaking of smouldering takes, it's time to address one of the most common criticisms of Wes Anderson films. I'm incredibly white. But you know what's even whiter? A Wes Anderson film!
His films seem to revolve entirely around white characters, with problems created almost entirely by their own selfishness. His films are very white, very straight, and very rich. Granted, Grand Budapest does have Zero, a protagonist who's a person of colour, but his presence is merely as a Watson, as an impartial, blank cataloguer of a more interesting man, as someone who reacts rather than acts, except even more so because at least Watson did stuff. Anderson's constant uncritical choice to focus his movies solely on white, spoiled characters leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Speaking of bad tastes, Monsieur Gustave is a resurrection of a kind of character we don't see that much anymore, thankfully. The weird effete-coded queer.
We think you're a real straight fellow.
Well, I've never been accused of that before, but I appreciate the sentiment.
They were usually villainous, and Monsieur Gustave is not, but the way he's handled and the deliberate decision to continually hint at his queerness just makes me uncomfortable.
That fucking faggot! If I learn you ever once laid a finger on my mother's body, living or dead, I swear to God I'll cut your throat. You hear me?
I thought I was supposed to be a fucking faggot.
You are, but you're bisexual.
How many double entendres did Anderson want to make about Monsieur Gustave? And is his queerness supposed to be funny? I suppose the idea of a man being attracted to older women is apparently funny enough, even though the old woman he's attracted to isn't even played by an old actress, but by Tilda Swinton in frankly grotesque old age makeup, despite the fact that there's no reason to cast her instead of an older actress, as she never appears in the film as a younger version of the same character.
I guess Anderson just couldn't pass up the opportunity to be cute.
But on top of Gustave's hilarious and disgusting attraction to cartoonishly fake old women, Anderson also adds some hilarity by having Gustave act like an effete old queen, while also hitting on everyone that moves, like he's about 10 different unfavourable queer stereotypes rolled into one.
It's not right.
I beg your pardon? Why is he sulking?
She's my girlfriend, he can't just buy her things.
I'm only interviewing this vision of loveliness on your behalf.
What even is this? Why is this happening? Has Wes Anderson ever met a queer person in his life, or did he just watch Laura once and call it a day? Anderson's toying with queerness seems faintly offensive.
I go to bed with all my friends.
So that was the Grand Budapest Hotel. Should you watch it?
I'd seen this film before, in cinemas, and loved it, but watching the Grand Budapest Hotel a second time was a mistake. The sets and costumes were still breathtaking, and the film's craft remained just as sumptuous and pleasing, but the story's appeal had soured, and I found the characters off-putting. This isn't a film that's worth revisiting. Once through, you find yourself seduced by its undeniable charm, but on the second viewing, I realised that there really wasn't much there.
By all means, watch this film, but know that it's inherently empty. A beautiful Fabergé egg with nothing inside. And now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to go. I've got a train to catch.